The king was dead, and by year's end, so was the world he left behind. A brief respite following centuries of British upheaval was about to come crashing down. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we'll delve into the year 1066, a year that ended both the Anglo-Saxon and Viking eras, and changed England forever. January 5th, 1066, and word has just reached the English nobility. Edward the Confessor, King of England, has died without an heir. On the surface, the succession seemed cut and dry. Edward's trusted advisor and the powerful Earl of Wessex, Harold Godwinson, was the obvious choice. England's elite supported him, and some sources even suggest Edward himself had promised Harold the throne. So, what was the problem? Let's jump back a bit in time. For years, Norse raiders, or Vikings, had ravaged the British Isles and mainland Europe. What began as quick hit-and-run raids evolved into full-scale invasions and eventually long-term settlements. One such settlement, Normandy, was granted to the Viking leader Rollo in 911 by Charles the Simple, trading land for protection. At roughly the same time, other Vikings came to control vast portions of Britain. It took a remarkable stand by King Alfred the Great to preserve any Anglo-Saxon rule in England, and the Vikings negotiated a compromise and retained control over the Danelaw, a large swath of northeastern England. The following generations saw England reclaim their lands, but the Norse threat was ever present. Crisis struck in England in the early 11th century. In 1002, King Ethelred the Unready, reportedly acting on bad advice, ordered the killing of Danish settlers he was told posed a threat. This brutal act, later known as the St. Brice Day Massacre, enraged the Danish king, Sweyn Forkbeard, who responded by invading and conquering England. Soon after Sweyn's death and a brief stint of English rule, his son, Canute the Great, took the throne, ushering in 3 decades of Viking rule. During that upheaval, Ethelred's family, including his son Edward, the one who died at the beginning of this video, were exiled to the aforementioned Normandy, just across the English Channel. Edward spent roughly 30 years in the Norman court, shaped by its culture and its people, and developed a close relationship with his cousin, William the Bastard, Duke of Normandy. And William would later claim that in 1051 he was promised the English throne during Edward's reign, adding a second claimant to the English throne. But there was yet another complication. During the 30-year Viking reign, Harthacnut, the last Danish king of England, had made a pact with Magnus the Good, king of Norway. If either died without an heir, the other would inherit their lands. Harthacnut died first, and Magnus inherited the Danish throne in 1042. But rather than also giving over England, the dying king had a change of heart and named his half-brother Edward his successor instead. Still, that pact did not disappear, and when Magnus died, his successor Harald Sigurdsson, better known as Harald Hardrada, inherited the pact, and, in his eyes, the vacant English throne with it. Let's recap. When Edward the Confessor died childless in 1066, 3 powerful men believed they had the right to the throne. Harold Godwinson, the king's chief advisor and essentially co-ruler, had claimed he was promised the throne. William of Normandy also claimed that Edward had promised him the crown. And Harald Hardrada, who saw himself as the rightful heir through a Norwegian treaty with Harthacnut, England's last Viking ruler. 3 men, 3 claims, 1 throne. When Edward the Confessor died, Harold Godwinson wasted no time. Already in England and wielding enormous influence, he arranged for his own coronation the very next day. Before either of the other major claimants had even heard the news, Harold was wearing the crown. Word of Harold's coronation reached William in Normandy, and he was furious. Per Norman sources, not only had William been promised the throne by Edward himself, Harold, in 1064, had even sworn, allegedly on holy relics, to support William's claim. True, the oath may have been made under pressure, since Harold's brother Wulfnoth was held hostage in Normandy, but an oath was an oath, and breaking one, particularly one made on sacred relics, was a sin. William's envoys, demanding that Harold honor the agreement, were refused, and William began preparations to take the crown by force. As a Christian ruler, William appealed to the Pope, arguing that Harold had broken a sacred oath sworn on holy relics, and that his claim was not just a matter of succession, but of justice. Pope Alexander II agreed and sent a papal banner, signaling the church's support. By the summer of 1066, William's fleet stood along the Norman coast, but unfavorable winds and reports of Harold's army guarding the southern coast delayed his crossing, a delay that, while frustrating, proved to be an incredibly lucky break for William. After months of preparing for a Norman invasion that never came, Godwinson released his wary troops, as dwindling supplies and the mental strain was becoming unsustainable. But just as quickly as the forces dispersed, they were recalled as a new threat arrived. Hardrada, backed by Godwinson's own exiled brother Tostig, landed with a massive Viking force, advancing through northern England. Godwinson quickly reassembled his army and led a brutal forced march, nearly 190 miles in just 4 days, to surprise the invaders near York. Godwinson met the Vikings at Stamford Bridge, by the river Derwent. Per the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Viking army sent a berserker, a semi-mythical, wild-eyed warrior, seemingly impervious to pain, to defend the crossing. He held the entire English advance, cutting down anyone who approached, even withstanding a hail of arrows. But one English soldier floated beneath the bridge and drove his spear into the berserker's groin. As the giant fell, the English stormed the bridge. What followed was a slaughter. Hardrada was killed, and the unprepared Viking army was decimated. Historians widely consider Hardrada's loss at Stamford Bridge to be the end of the Viking Age. But just as England exhaled, it was thrown into a second, even more defining battle. Fresh off their grueling march north and bloody victory at Stamford Bridge, the winds along the southern coast had shifted, and the Normans had landed at Pevensey. Harold's battered army immediately marched south, pausing in London. Hoping to rest and hold the home ground, he tried to lure William north, but William was too clever. Refusing to take the bait, William began burning villages, pillaging farms, and devastating the countryside to draw Harold out. Faced with mounting pressure and unwilling to let southern England burn, Harold and his wary army were forced to press on southward. On October 14, 1066, the two forces finally met near Hastings. Godwinson's army, with the high ground, forming their formidable shield wall atop Senlac Hill. The Normans opened the battle with a volley of arrows, but the angle proved ineffective, either defended by English shields or projected harmlessly over the English heads. Repeated attacks by both Norman infantry and cavalry failed to break the English lines, which held firm. At one point, the Normans appeared to retreat, either due to rumors of William's death or as a deliberate tactic. The English broke formation to pursue them, but William, alive and alert, rallied his forces and counterattacked. He may have even repeated feigned retreats throughout the battle, gradually pulling the English shield wall apart. During this prolonged clash, Harold Godwinson was killed, traditional accounts noting that he took an arrow to the eye. While his troops fought valiantly around his body, the rest of the English army began to collapse. By nightfall, the field belonged to William. Enjoying this so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. While the battles of Stamford Bridge and Hastings are often seen as the final chapters of the Viking and Anglo-Saxon eras, history rarely provides clean endings. By the middle 11th century, the Vikings themselves had changed. What had once been a feared force of raiders had evolved into something far more complex. Across Europe, Norse groups had gradually settled, adopted Christianity, and fused with local populations. The Normans in France, the Rus in Eastern Europe, and even large parts of the Danelaw in England were all products of this transformation. The Viking world had shifted so much that those fighting at Stamford Bridge would have been nearly unrecognizable to their ancestors from 3 centuries prior. That battle marked more of a farewell than a definitive conclusion. As for the Anglo-Saxons, the defeat at Hastings did not mean they simply vanished. William of Normandy, now called William the Conqueror, was far from universally accepted. While the upper echelons of English nobility were quick to bend the knee, and many were swiftly replaced by Norman lords, the rest of the country did not go quietly. Entire regions resisted. Local leaders refused to recognize William's claim, instead rallying around Edgar Atheling, the teenage nephew of Edward the Confessor, as the rightful heir to the throne. The years that followed were marked by violent suppression. William responded to uprisings with overwhelming force, determined to secure his hold over the kingdom. The most infamous of these crackdowns came in the winter of 1069 and 1070, during what became known as the Harrying of the North, a brutal campaign that left entire, largely peasant regions scorched and starved into submission. Rebellions would continue sporadically for close to a decade, yet by the end of it, resistance had been crushed, and Norman rule was firmly entrenched. We know a great deal about the Battle of Hastings. We know it ended the Anglo-Saxon period. We know it set England on the course toward its modern iteration. But many of the events surrounding Hastings remain, in many respects, shrouded in uncertainty. Our understanding of the battle and the years leading up to it are often dictated by conflicting sources and political propaganda. The size of the armies, the precise course of the battle, and even the legitimacy of competing claims to the throne are still debated. Did Edward truly promise the crown to William of Normandy? Did Harold Godwinson swear an oath under duress with his family in William's custody? These foundational questions still remain unanswered. Even one of the most iconic sources for this period, the Bayeux Tapestry, which offers vivid imagery of the conquest, tells an artistic version of the story shaped by Norman triumph. Much like what we know about 1066, it reflects the lens of the victor more than the clarity of truth. What is clear, however, is the sheer scale of the battle's consequences. While the armies themselves may not have been enormous by modern standards, the impact of Hastings was seismic. As in Normandy and later Sicily and the Levant, the Normans didn't simply conquer, they integrated. They blended their customs with local traditions, transforming societies not through eradication, but adaptation. In England, laws changed, governance evolved, and society was restructured, not necessarily for better or worse, but into something altogether new. The English language is perhaps the most enduring symbol of that fusion. Old English absorbed Norman French, initially among the elite, but eventually throughout the population. This hybrid gave rise to Middle English, a linguistic evolution that laid the foundation for the language we know today. It's why we use both king, Old English, and royal, Norman French, cow and beef, house and mansion. Modern English itself is a monument to 1066. Administratively, the changes were just as lasting. The Domesday Book, a sweeping survey of England's land and resources, reflected a new level of centralized oversight. Legal traditions merged, with Norman law interlacing with Anglo-Saxon customs to form what would become English common law. And as new hierarchies took shape, pressure from new classes would grow, eventually producing watershed moments like the Magna Carta's drafting. The Norman Conquest didn't just reframe who held power, it reshaped the mechanisms of power itself. Though the day after Hastings may have looked much like the one before, England had begun a transformation that would leave the country unrecognizable. Many historians view the 1066 Norman victory as the single most consequential event in English history. And whether debates will always remain over whether it deserved that title, there's no denying its legacy. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.